Hi guys, Nuclear Revolution Gaming here, with a new type of video today. We're going to be looking at a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile. I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For about 4 or 5 months-ish now, and I've been really enjoying this deck. This is the deck that I mainly use when I go play at like locals and stuff like that. I've won a couple matches, haven't won any tournaments, but that could also just be because maybe I'm trash, who knows. But this is my Lair of Darkness and Blue Eyes deck. So let's go ahead and take a look at the deck. And first off, we have our boss monster, Triple Darkest Diabolos, Lord of the Lair. So what's cool about him is you're not going to be normal summoning him very often at all, if ever. Mainly the way you're going to be summoning him is by his first effect. Whenever a dark monster that you control is tributed, and this guy is in your hand or graveyard, when you tribute it, you can special summon him from the hand or graveyard. Good rank 8 3k beater, always nice to have. And his secondary effect you're not going to be using too much. You contribute a dark monster, including himself, to to choose one random card from your opponent's hand, and they put it on the top or bottom of their deck. Usually I wouldn't suggest using this effect too often unless they have like one card in their hand, or you know that that card is something like maybe an Ash Blossom, or maybe like a Playmaker for their deck, for example, that you know that they have. Next up, we have Triple Blue Eyes White Dragon. Wouldn't be a Blue Eyes deck without Blue Eyes White Dragon. The classic rank 8 3k beater. We all know what he's about. I won't go too much into it. Works really well with this deck, with the Diabolos and stuff like that. Next up, we have Triple Lilith, Lady of Lament. So when she's normal summoned, her original attack becomes 1,000, but you're not really going to be using her for attacking or anything like that. You're going to be using her for her effect, which is a quick effect, so you can use it during your turn or your opponent's turn. You contribute a dark monster and reveal 3 normal traps from your deck. Your opponent randomly selects one of them to set, for you to set. And again, this is a quick effect, so you can summon her. You can tribute herself for this, but if you have another dark monster, you can tribute that dark monster on your turn, and then maybe tribute herself on her next turn. Good way to get the traps in this deck out and ready to go. That's useful for more than one reason, as you'll see. Next up for the triples, we have Triple Arima, the Wicked Warden. This is essentially your terraforming of the deck. You can discard this card from your hand to add a Layer of Darkness to your hand. If you normal summon it, you can tribute a dark monster to draw a card, or if you tributed a monster other than this card, you can actually search a Darkest Diabolos from your deck. So it's a good way to search your Diabolos if you need it, and it's also a good way to get the Layer of Darkness out on the field. And lastly, for the triples of the monsters, we have Triple White Stone of Ancients. This is a good way to get your Blue Eyes out. A lot of the cards that you'll see in this deck actually involve discarding, so this is great discard fodder. And of course, its secondary ability, when it's in the graveyard, you can banish it to add a Blue Eyes monster back to your hand from the graveyard. So that's always nice to have. And it is a tuner too, so that's always good. Next up on the monsters, I have a single Maiden with Eyes of Blue. Great monster to open up with, especially if you don't really have much else. Just kind of good to sit on this card for maybe a turn or two. If they attack it, once per turn it can negate the attack, switch its battle position, and you can summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon from your hand, deck, or graveyard, which is really nice. Same thing if it's targeted by an effect, but remember, it can only activate one of those effects per turn and only once that turn. So be careful on how you use it, or how defensive you want to be with it. You don't want to rely on it basically fixing your dead hands if you do get any. Next up, we have a single Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon. This is a proxy because I am kind of a poor boy. Don't really have the money to spend on a $25 card. Decent way to kind of open up with if you have a Blue Eyes in your hand, or a Melody of Awakening Dragon. Great way to go into just a simple play. You summon him, and you use his ability to target a monster to pop it, but it can't attack that turn. Good monster, and it's also treated as Blue Eyes White Dragon when it's on the field, so that's always good too. Lastly, for the Blue Eyes monsters, we have Dragon Spirit of White, just a single one. When it's normal or special summoned, you can target a spell or trap and banish it, which is really nice, especially against things like Trickstar Light Stage or things like that. Just great way to get rid of like those pesky spells and traps that you're worrying about. Its second ability you'll actually use quite a lot in this deck. So what you want to do is you want to have this in the graveyard. You special summon it, pop a spell or trap, and you use its second ability to where you contribute it to summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon from your hand. So it's a good way to get Blue Eyes out and pop a card at the same time. Most of you Blue Eyes players will know exactly the kind of play I'm talking about. So next up, this is kind of a personal favorite of mine of the deck. This one will, you'll definitely make some enemies with this card. Jinzo. I just run a single one in the main deck. Negates all traps on the field, and traps cannot be activated while it's on the field. This is a great way to lock out a lot of trap-heavy decks like Altergeist. It's a good way to prevent Trickstar Reincarnation from popping, things like that. It's a good anti-meta card right now, considering some of the top decks are using a lot of traps. And 2400 attacks. Also, it only takes one tribute, and it is a dark monster, so it works pretty well in this deck. Next up, I have a single Armageddon Knight. This is kind of a foolish burial. You want to use his effect to get Diabolos in the grave. When he's normal summoned, you can send one dark-type monster to the graveyard. I would suggest always doing this with Diabolos. Yeah, pretty simple card. Next up, I have a single Legendary Maju Garzette. This card, I have won a lot of games with this card. You tribute all monsters you control, and if you have Lair of Darkness on the field, you can actually tribute one of their monsters. And it gains attack equal to the combined original attack of all of the monsters it tributed, so you can really get this guy beefed up really quick. There's been times where I've gotten him up to 8,000, 10,000, 14,000, I mean, it's pretty easy to get him into some ridiculous attack numbers, and he also does piercing damage, so that's always nice. So it's a great way to strike for game, and probably one of the most common ways I win games. Next up, we have a Dark Armed Dragon. This is a really, really nice card. I didn't really know how to use him for a long time, because you'd think that his summoning effect is a little restrictive. You have to have exactly 3 dark monsters in your graveyard to special summon him. But it turns out, since you're going to be recycling your Diaboloses and whatnot, it's not as hard as you think to get him out, especially pretty early in a game. You could use something like Armageddon Knight maybe to get him in there if, you don't quite have that. But also, you can banish a dark monster from your graveyard and target a card on the field, not a monster or a spell or trap, a card on the field, and banish it. Is it banish? Yes, it is a banish. And that is not once per turn. So remember that. That's why it's limited at 1 right now. Next up, we have Destrudo, the Lost Dragon's Vision. This card you're not going to be using too much. I usually use his effect. He'll usually be like discard fodder, and he'll be in the graveyard. And I'll usually use his special summon effect to target Maiden, to trigger Maiden, to get a Blue Eyes out in the field, and then have him just kind of as a 3k, kind of like a shield. I don't really use him too much, but he's good to target Maiden with. And basically, it kind of gives you nice 3k defense. So, decent card to have. I would say it's kind of optional. I personally like it because it makes Maiden easier to use. So that's all for the monsters. Let's go into the spells and traps. We have a triple Lair of Darkness, kind of the namesake of the deck. When this card's activated, all face-up monsters, including your opponents, become dark. And once per turn, if you would tribute a monster to activate a card's effect, like Diabolos, Lilith, Arma, etc., etc., you can actually tribute a monster your opponent controls. Like I said earlier, with like Legendary Madre Garzette, it's a great way to swing for game if you have this card out in the hand. And also for when this card's on the field, every time you tribute a monster, at the end phase you get a Torment token equal to the amount of monsters that you tributed. So let's say you tributed 3 monsters that turn, you get 3 tokens. If your opponent tributed 3 monsters or had 3 monsters tributed during their turn, they get tokens as well. So it's a decent way to like clog up their boards if you really want to go that route. I've personally been able to do it a couple times, but sometimes you might accidentally give them some tribute fodder, so watch out for that. Just be wary about what deck you're facing. Next up we have a Triple Melody of Awakening Dragon. This will search pretty much all of your boss monsters. It searches your Blue Eyes White Dragon, it searches your Darkest Diabolos, and it also discards. So like I said earlier, you're going to want to be discarding like your stones, or if you're trying to get like a Dark Armed Dragon out, you might want to just kind of discard that one dark monster that you have in your hand. Just a good searcher to try to get your boss monsters into your hand, and also a good way to get alternative out on the field, because you can just search an alternative in a Blue Eyes. If you really need kind of like the spot removal, or you just need a nice, easy 3K play. Next up, we have 2 trade-ins. I only run 2 because I don't... basically, I did run it at 3 for a little while, but it turned out it was a little cloggy. I just like to run 2 trade-ins. You do have a lot of rank 8 monsters, but you're not going to be wanting to be discarding all of them. You don't want to discard your Garzettes, your alternatives, stuff like that. So I would just suggest running 2. Next up we have 1 Lightning Vortex. I'm using Lightning Vortex instead of Regeki for 2 reasons. One, this one actually discards to pop all your monsters, so it's a good way to get like stones in the grave and stuff like that. But also, I'm just poor and can't afford Regeki right now, so this is what I have. But it works decently well, I'd actually say. It works pretty well with how I run the deck. Next up we have Foolish Burial. It's Foolish Burial. Gets your monsters in the grave. Do what you need to do. You can do it with your stones. Your Diabolos can make for Dark Armed Dragon plays. The possibilities are endless with how you can use Foolish Burial in this deck, because a lot of monsters do revolve around being in the grave. Speaking of which, I run 1 Return of the Dragon Lords. This will revive your Diabolos, your Blue Eyes, your Dragon Spirits, all of that. And I love its second effect, where if a dragon monster you control would be destroyed, you can just banish this card from the graveyard instead. Always great to kind of give your dragon some protection. Next up for the revival cards, we do have 1 Monster Reborn. It's Monster Reborn. You should be running this in every deck that you have, regardless of what it is. I mean, it's Monster Reborn. While it's not banned, we may as well use it, right? Speaking of cards that probably should be banned, we run 1 Soul Charge in here. Soul Charge, great card. Great way to just kind of beef out your board if you really need to. Get you out of sticky situations. Soul Charge, you guys already know how Soul Charge works, but don't forget, can't conduct your battle phase when you use it, so don't forget that. I tend to sometimes. And lastly for the spells, I actually run 1 Fang of Critias. This deck is extremely trap heavy. You're going to be using a lot of trap cards in this deck, as you guys will see here in a second. And I wanted to use the Fang of Critias engine in here because it just works so well with Lair of Darkness. I actually want to start running this guy at 2 or even 3 maybe, because I just really like the way that the fusions work. So really good card. I would highly suggest running this in any Lair of Darkness deck that you have, regardless of what other engines you're using. Speaking of the Fang of Critias engines, the traps that we're going to be using for that, we have 1 Crush Card Virus, 1 Mirror Force, and 1 Ring of Destruction. So out of all of these 3, you're probably going to be using Mirror Force the most. A great way to actually boost your Fang of Critias' plays is actually by using Lilith, Lady of Lament. you could actually technically target all three of these in your deck if you have Fang of Critias in your hand especially. So you're essentially guaranteed like a fusion play that turn. You're going to be using Mirror Force a little bit. I mean, you know, it's Mirror Force. What can you do? I don't think I've ever used Ring of Destruction for its intended purpose or Crush Card. Crush Card is a little too restrictive. And it gives your opponent a chance to put stuff in the grave. So let's say you're like facing a Blue Eyes deck, you know, that could be kind of a problem. So I would really just suggest using Ring of Destruction and Crush Card for their fusions, and you can use Mirror Force kind of as intended. Okay. Next up, we do have the rest of the viruses. We have one Eradicator Epidemic Virus. This one destroys spells or traps, your choice on which one. And you have to tribute a monster with 25 or 100 or more attack. Grinning Grave destroys all monsters, and also has a neat ability where if you tribute a monster with 2,000 or more attack, your opponent has to send one card to the grave for every 500 attack that monster had. Now you're probably going to be targeting Darkest Diabolos with this, so in that case they would have to send 6 cards in their hand or deck to the graveyard. But what's really nice about Grinning Grave is that the monsters that get sent to the grave because of its effect actually do not activate that turn. So if they send their White Stone of Ancients to the grave, well, they're not going to get that nice Blue Eyes at the end of the turn. And Full Force Virus, you have to tribute a monster with 2,000 or more defense. So again, you want to go after Diabolos. This one destroys monsters with 1,500 or less defense. This is a good way to go after like hand traps and stuff like that. If you know that your opponent's running a lot of hand traps, you can use Full Force and try to get rid of those. Same with Grinning Grave, though. You know, it works just as well for that kind of thing. So, and lastly, for the last two cards in the main deck, I run one Bottomless Trap Hole. It's Bottomless Trap Hole. I feel like, you know, any deck could really use that. And one Waking the Dragon. You'll see in the extra deck, there is a reason why you'd want to use this. These both are targetable by Lilith, so if you ever need them, they're right there for you. So, Waking the Dragon, if it's set and it gets popped or banished, while it's set, you can summon one monster from your deck or extra deck. I highly recommend going for the extra deck. Speaking of the extra deck, let's move on to that. We have one Destruction Dragon, a Doom Virus Dragon, and a Mirror Force Dragon. Now, out of all of these, I would definitely suggest going with Destruction Dragon the most. For one, it's got 3,000 defense, so it's nice to have kind of like that good defense there. But also, it has the benefit of having Ring of Destruction's effect, where you can destroy a monster on the field to inflict damage of its original attack to your opponent, but it also has the plus of not inflicting that damage to you, which is the one downside to Ring of Destruction, hence why I wouldn't suggest trying to use it for its intended purpose. Doom Virus Dragon is essentially Crush Card Virus with 1,900 attack, and Mirror Force Dragon is very interesting. It's not quite Mirror Force's attack, but if a monster you control is targeted for an attack or by an opponent's card effect, except during the damage step, you can destroy all cards your opponent controls. Now, I do have kind of a ruling question with this. How does this work with Borreload Dragon? If someone wants to put that in the comments, I want to know how Mirror Force Dragon and Borreload Dragon kind of interact with each other. Because as you guys know, if Borreload Dragon attacks a monster, it takes it until the end of the turn. So, you know, I just want to know, like, can you actually activate its effect in that sense? This is one of our Waking the Dragon targets that I'd like to run in this deck. Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, 4,500 beater. Very classic card. But yeah, you know, if it's an option to go into this with Waking the Dragon if you really just want a really nice beefy monster to go ahead and swing for. Next up we have Blue Eyes Twin Burst. You know, we're running an alternative and we're running 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, so it makes sense to run Twin Burst. It can make up to 2 attacks on in each battle phase on monsters. You can't, say, attack their one monster and then smack them for 3k. They do have to have monsters on the field, so remember that. But if it attacks a monster and that monster is not destroyed by battle, this guy banishes it, so that's always good to have. Always nice to get rid of like the pesky boss monsters like that. This is our second Waking the Dragon target. I have one Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. I mean, this card is absolutely amazing, I think, still in this meta. I think it's a little bit underrated. So if a level 5 or higher monster attacks it, it gains attack equal to the attack of the attacking monster. Let's see. And when another monster's effect is activated, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. And if you do, it gains attack equal to the destroyed monster. So this guy, he can get pretty beefy pretty quick during a turn. There's a reason why this card used to be 90 bucks. So yeah, you know, it's a really powerful card. Lastly, for the Synchros, we have one Azure Silver Dragon. You're mainly going to want to use this to revive your Blue Eyes. If you've got them all in the grave, or you know, you ran out of your soul charges and all the revival stuff and all whatnot. And it's a good way to protect your dragons, because when he's synchro summoned until the end of your opponent's turn after you've summoned this, they can't target your dragon monsters with card effects. Or is it target? Yeah, they can't target dragon monsters you control with card effects, and also they can't be destroyed by card effects. Okay, so, you know, a good way to protect your dragon monsters, I always suggest, you know, summoning him in defense mode, because he's got that nice 3k defense. So, kind of a theme with this deck, it seems like. I'm only running 1 Xyz for right now, because I haven't quite gotten all the Xyz that I want. I do want to grab a Sun Dragon Overlord of Heliopolis and a Sanafon the Sky Prison for this deck. But for right now, we're running 1 Thunder End Dragon. This is, for this deck, you're going to want 2 Blue Eyes White Dragons to summon it, 2 level 8 normal monsters. Once per turn, you can detach Xyz material from this card to Dark Hole, essentially, except for itself. So, nice way to completely board wipe, or let's say that, you know, you've got a stone kind of set on the field, or it's on the field and your opponent just won't swing into it, won't get rid of it. This is a nice way to get your stones into the grave if they're just kind of being pesky and on the field. So, good card. One of my favorites in this deck, actually. I do use him quite a lot. And for the links, I do only run 3 links in this deck, but I do plan on potentially adding more later. We have 1 Underclock Taker, a Space Insulator, and these are mostly just kind of for the down arrows, and 1 Decode Talker. I think Decode Talker is the best link in the game. That's not Firewall Dragon. Ban Firewall Dragon, please. Space Insulator, I only really use him for the down arrows, but remember that any monster that it points to loses 800 attack and defense. And I do use Underclock Taker's effect. Well, to be honest, I can't really remember the last time I used it, but I know I have. So, it's a good card to have when you really need it. So that's it for the main deck. I thought I'd show off my side deck that I've been running with this to kind of give you an idea of, you know, maybe what to give you some ideas for it. The first card in the side deck that I have is an extra Jinzo. Nice way to, you know, again, lock them out of their traps. Jinzo is kind of vulnerable, though. He can be Regeki, he can be targeted and all of that stuff, so he can be removed pretty easily, so sometimes you may just want to have a second one on hand, so I do. Then I also run 1 The End of Anubis. This basically locks them out of graveyard effects. As long as this card remains face up on the field, all effects of spells, traps, and monster cards that target a card or cards in the graveyard that activate in the graveyard are negated. So, you know, it's a good way to lock, like, for an example, you know, Blue Eyes players, it locks them out of their Stones plays, you know, stuff like that. So if it activates in the graveyard, well, you know, it locks them out of that real quick. Also, really nice looking card. It's kind of an older one. I feel like not many people know about this card. I haven't really ever seen it around, so I kind of actually found it in someone's binder, so it was like, oh, hey, do you know what this does? Well, he didn't, but traded for it. Now I have the advantage. Next up, I do run 1 Vanity's Fiend. If your opponent is just special summoning the hell out of their decks, like, you know, for example, like 6 Samurais or something like that, this is a good way to kind of really slow them down, stop them from, you know, making their plays and stuff like that. Vanity's Fiend can't be special summoned, and while it's on the field, neither player can special summon monsters. So be careful when you use this, because you could potentially lock yourself out of your own plays. I would suggest using Vanity's Fiend a little more defensively rather than offensively, but you never know. Maybe somebody could use that a little better than I do in this deck. I do run one Dark Hole. It's Dark Hole, nice non-targeting removal, and, you know, gets your stones in the grave and stuff like that. Gets stuff in the grave in general, because it pops your own monsters too. It's Dark Hole. Why not run it? I also run an extra Grinning Grave. It's, in my opinion, the best virus out of all of the viruses, so I figured I may as well run a second one. You can't run a second Eradicator Epidemic, unfortunately, which I think is probably the second best one. But yeah, definitely would suggest running this in a side deck, or even just running two of them in the main. Then we have one Torrential Tribute. This is also searchable by Lilith, so good way to just, you know, pop board wipe and stuff like that. So you know, decent trap for that kind of thing. Next up we have the King of D and the Flute of Summoning Dragon. I run both of these mainly if I'm having trouble summoning out monsters, either because they have a lot of hand traps or they just have something that's preventing me from summoning. Sometimes you may just want to have the King of D and Flute of Summoning Dragon. You know, this can summon your Diabolos, your Dragon Spirits, stuff like that. So decent combo to run if you really need it. And lastly, for the traps in this side deck, we have a Mind Crush. This is a good way to get rid of hand traps and really just like combo pieces in general if you know the deck that you're facing up against. It's a good way to just kind of get rid of that. If you call it, they have to send to the graveyard every copy of the card that you called if you called it right to the graveyard. But remember, there is that thing where you have to discard a random card if you get it wrong. And then Magic Cylinder, again, both of these are searchable by Lilith. I figured I may as well put Magic Cylinder in here. I have won a couple games using Magic Cylinder, so that could just be preference for me. And lastly, in the side deck, I run one Silver's Cry. This is kind of mainly if I'm just... If the graveyard effects are kind of getting negated, it's a good way to kind of just go into like Blue Eyes plays. Because this deck can kind of switch around between if you want to go like Lair of Darkness and Fang of Critias, or if you want to use Blue Eyes. I figured I've gotten the balance enough to where Silver's Cry could be really useful. And that is actually all for the deck. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys have any suggestions on how I could make this deck better, yeah, feel free to leave those in the comments. I'm always open to suggestions, and yeah, hope this was a nice way to start off the Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos. I do plan on posting more in the future. Maybe some duels, maybe some more deck profiles as I start to build more and more decks. I am very interested in creating a Skull Servants deck, Relinquished deck, and maybe like a pure Blue Eyes, so we'll see how that goes. I'm kind of more of an old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. I used to play it a lot back in the day, but yeah, so... Hope you guys liked the video, and have a good day.